countries which have a capybara. Of course, these animals are native to South America, so most of these countries just have them. They're kind of just out there roaming. I guess I should say they are more specifically in the northeastern parts of this continent, as well as they do get as far up as Costa Rica at times. So of course, for these other nations, in order to have a capybara, they must have them in a zoo. So we have the CUM Alliance all with one. There's at least one zoo in South Africa with capybaras. They can be found throughout most of Europe. Maybe it gets too cold in Finland and Estonia. Come on, Balkans, you gotta get on this. Israel and Saudi Arabia have some capybaras. Finally, there's Kazakhstan, China, Japan, Thailand, well, and a few others in Asia as well. I gotta bring them over to Australia and New Zealand too. I can't help but be reminded every time I think of capybaras that some Catholic bishops classify them as a fish because they live in water. This is for reasons you might really not want to know. Glad to see their population numbers is believed to still be like at least 2 million. China versus the US. How many people think their country is democratic? 83% of the population of China believed to be democratic. Meanwhile, this number is a lot lower in the US. Only 49% of our people believe we're in a democracy? I guess the phrasing of this is a little bit different. Believe their country is democratic. There's so much to be said here. First of all, what happens to the Chinese people saying no, they don't believe they live in a democracy? Does their social credit score go down negative 83%? I knew the US would be somewhat low, but I didn't think we'd be at 49%. Kinda must love their government. I guess after all, it is called the People's Republic of China. Of course, we all know in that same vein, North Korea is one of the most democratic places on earth. It's literally right there in their name. Countries that have been sanctioned by the US since 1962. These countries haven't been sanctioned for over 50 years. Like at one point, were they sanctioned after this date? Cuba should be the least surprising. I mean, I think they're still pretty heavily sanctioned. Obviously, so is Venezuela. But when you zoom out, this does get pretty insane. Pretty much everyone in the American continents have been sanctioned at one point. I think the most surprising is Canada. What did they do? The only place that has dodged this is the nation of Guyana. I'm gonna chalk this one up to the fact that just most Americans don't understand geography. Just forgot they were there. Things get even wackier in Europe. Remember 1962 and about 30 years after that, we were pretty heavily in the Cold War. So everything that was once behind the former Iron Curtain shouldn't be a surprise it was sanctioned at one point. But France was on our side. I don't know how this happened. I'm gonna say this use of the word sanctioned here is extremely loose. Like maybe we just didn't sell them like fish one time. Love that we've imposed sanctions on places like Ireland, Norway, and Sweden, yet we've never sanctioned Serbia? I'm not buying this. Funny enough, Morocco, the first nation to ever recognize the US, hasn't been sanctioned by them since 1962. I guess they're still riding that perfect diplomatic move there. Most of Africa has been sanctioned. Keep in mind, South Sudan's only been around since 2011, so they just haven't had enough time, probably. Oman's never been sanctioned. When was Israel sanctioned? This is looking really... This is Georgia, right? This is Georgia and Armenia. It's actually incredible to see some of the former Soviet states sanctioned, because they've only had 30 years to do it, yet they still managed to do it. South Korea? Of course, we've been buddies with Japan. Never sanctioned Vietnam. This was during the height of the war. Also, we've been cool with Australia and New Zealand. Love this though. Safe until now. Who knows what will happen tomorrow? Mexicans from 93% to below 50% of US border apprehensions. We're talking about the number of US border encounters by place of origin. Obviously, starting off in the year 2000, almost 100% of border apprehensions were from Mexico, and those levels remained strong until about 2010, when maybe it goes down to 90%. Border apprehensions just began to dip as we head into 2010 and 2012, and actually, as of about 15 years ago, Mexico's just continued to go down up until COVID times. There was a giant jump in 2019, and we now have what is going on today, which this doesn't even look like 53%. This looks below 50 for sure. So the vast majority of these people that are involved in border apprehensions are not coming from Mexico. Well, maybe I should rephrase that. Sometimes they do come from Mexico, but they are not Mexican citizens. Actually, the YouTube channel, Channel 5, Andrew Callahan's channel, recently did a fantastic video about it. I would absolutely recommend that. This is also definitely a factor too. Mexico is quickly becoming a huge manufacturing hub. There's a lot more economic opportunity there. A lot of the people that are trying to cross are either from Venezuela or some of these Central American countries. In fact, a lot of them are from Africa too. I mean, this Channel 5 video literally just goes over all that. A proposal for a Schengen Plus policy. The Schengen zone is currently an area comprising of 27 European countries that have officially abolished passports and many other types of border control at their mutual borders. But this is a proposal to include some of North America as well as a lot of Oceania, extending to the US and Canada as well as Australia and New Zealand. Now remember, it's already kind of easier for people to enter between the Schengen area and some of these other countries. For instance, in the US, visas are not required for short stays in the Schengen area. That's how I was able to stay in Europe for like 2 months. But this would obviously just be on a whole nother level. Love how this man only has really one thing in mind. I think this has under a 1% chance of ever happening, but it's an interesting concept. Although they do let the nation of Australia participate in the European singing contest Eurovision. Maybe this will be the slow snowball effect. The second most taught foreign language in Europe. So this is not to be confused with the first most taught foreign language because that map is actually really uninteresting. If you're not the UK or Ireland, it's almost entirely English. There are some exceptions though, and the Baltics and a couple others down here. But we're talking about the second most taught language, and in the two native English-speaking countries, it's Spanish. That's because the most taught foreign language is French here, which is not surprising at all considering their proximity to France. Although even France themselves are learning Spanish as their second most popular foreign language. That is because, as we saw from the other map, the other language they're learning is English. Portugal and Spain are of course learning English, but behind that, they're then learning French. The Italians are learning French, and so is Germany and Austria. I love that we've divided Belgium as they should be. So the north is learning English. This is the side that speaks Dutch. And the south, they speak French. These people are learning Dutch. So their first language is English, then they're learning Dutch to be able to connect with the other part of their country. It's so funny this country like has two completely different languages, which Switzerland has like a solid 4. I really wish they were included on this map. The little old country of Luxembourg's learning German, and then the vast majority of countries over here are learning German as well. Surprised to be seeing Romania learn French, as well as Greece and Albania too. They're also focused on French. You really don't want to learn German, I guess. This map is showing that the Baltics are learning Russian as their second, but we saw that that was their first. Maybe we're still confused. It might be close between Russian and English. Meanwhile, Finland learning Swedish. What? Yeah, in all these countries, English is the most commonly taught foreign language, of course, with a few exceptions that we've talked about. So interesting, Flanders, like I said, the Dutch side, they're learning French as the first language, and then they're learning English, because this is English. Something that probably goes hand in hand with that map. The most common immigrants in Germany, divided in fine detail by like almost a county level. So as you can see, there are a lot of Turkish flags in there, which I guess explains why I see so many of these memes literally every single week. Interesting, near the German border with Switzerland, it's mostly Italy. French people are not moving to Germany. That's really interesting. Of course, near the Austrian border, there are a lot of Austrian immigrants in this part of Germany. Same with Czechia. There's a couple Czechs. Love this dot of Americans. And there's actually a couple of Americans over this way too. I only recently discovered the reason why Americans seem to be obsessed with specifically the Bavarian part of Germany. It comes down to a lot of Americans were stationed here after World War II when we were occupying this land. I went to Munich, so I was learning about Oktoberfest. Obviously, when those Americans came back home, they brought those traditions that they learned back to the state. And that's why we like to celebrate this out here too. My mind was blown when I figured out that connection finally. And again, echoes from the Cold War, weirdly on the Eastern German side. A lot of these immigrants are Vietnamese, or I even see a couple Chinese. Of course, along the Polish border, these are Polish immigrants. Weird to see Luxembourg up here, nowhere near where they border Luxembourg. It's just like a random amalgamation of nations over here. Here's that same map, but for France. These are all the top immigrants for each county of this nation. There's surprisingly not very many Spanish along the Spanish border, only here, but Portugal is actually dominating. A lot of Morocco and Algeria, which Algeria should make a lot of sense because that was like the heart of French colonization in Africa. I mean, still to this day, 33% of Algerians can read and write French. So them migrating here is logical. Tons of Brits in Brittany, France, and that's really interesting because that might be their historical connection to the Celts. I mean, I'm sure there's a lot of explanations for this, but this might be one of them, honestly. There are some Turks here in France, but the vast majority just stay in Germany. All this Portugal in the heart. Same map, but for Italy, all the most common immigrants in the Italian peninsula. It's literally just all Romanian. Romania loves Italy. I'm sure part of this has to be a Romance language thing, and then of course the proximity that Romania is to Italy makes the most sense to do that jump. What I've noticed about Romanians, they know so many languages. I mean, they're obviously surrounded by a lot of other countries that speak other languages, but also they have that connection to the Romance languages. There are a couple of spots in this map of Albanians, but not necessarily close to Albania. The Albanians are moving kind of further away. We've got some Egyptian immigrants here, also Indians, of course, Slovenia along the border of Slovenia. Is that the nation of Senegal in Sardinia? What the hell? I did not expect to see that. You would think there'd be a little bit more connection to Italy's colonial history. I don't know, like some Libyans, maybe some Somalians, but not really. I mean, I guess there's some Tunisians here, but they, you know, it's different. Finally, here's the Iberian Peninsula, which I think is probably the most interesting. First of all, we finally have a majority of American immigrants in a European country. That's Brazilians and Portugal. And again, the shared language thing, as well as the shared history and culture, this is really obvious. And I believe Brazilians only have to stay in Portugal for maybe 2 or 3 years before they get citizenship, and then they can move throughout the EU. Oh, it's actually 5 years. They gotta wait 5 years. Which is interesting because a lot of Spanish-speaking countries in Latin America only have to wait 2 years in Spain before they get citizenship. However, we don't necessarily see that reflected in this map. A lot of the top immigrants are coming from Bulgaria, Morocco, and Romania. Of course, the Brits still trying to come on down here. Oh, they're going back to Gibraltar. They're also in the southernmost point in Portugal. Oh, here's some Venezuelans in Galicia. Here are all those maps put together along with some others as well. I think a little bit of Austria and Slovenia are included. A lot of people from Croatia and Bosnia moving there. We do have Switzerland, a lot of Portuguese. The Netherlands has some German, some Polish. There's just a big mixture in Belgium. And finally for the UK, a lot of Indians, some Irish. There's this spot of Americans, and I believe I looked this up once. I think there's an American base there, somewhere somewhere located there, which is why Americans move permanently. Pakistanis more north as you travel. And then the Irish have a lot of Polish and then, of course, British as well. That's an interesting historical thing there. British to be moving to Ireland. A little bit of Denmark too. Man, these are such cool maps to look at. I know these probably take a long time, but I want like a version of the entire world with this. I don't even know if we can get a hold of that data though. The highest paid job in every U.S. state. One of the top positions we're going to see here are surgeons. So you can make $281,000 in New Mexico as a surgeon, also in Kansas and Nebraska, Wyoming, Michigan, and up here in Maine. And there's the anesthesiologists. These guys are making bank. Well, I guess they're all making bank, but yeah, Texas, California, Nevada. I did not realize dentists make so much money. Here they are in Utah. I guess they can make a lot of money. There's oral surgeons in Florida, but also what? I shouldn't be researching this. I don't even know what that is. Again, more orthodontists in Alabama, Missouri. I do feel like whenever I go to my dentist's office, like it's just really nice in there. I'm pretty sure he drives like a $250,000 car. I'm not joking. It's crazy. It's all come together now. There are pediatricians here in Mississippi. So I guess now you just have to calculate what profession requires the least amount of school or requires the least amount of student loans to get this degree. Because that's the thing. They're going to have to make a lot of money in order to pay all that stuff back. That's how they get you. You also need to make sure you pass. Countries that drive on the left or the right. Obviously here in the US, we drive cars on the right, but if you're from some of these orange places, you drive on the left to go up. Now, a lot of this can be traced back to, of course, the British Empire. Both the UK and Ireland drive on the left, and a lot of the British African colonies also drive on the left, including a place like Jamaica, which was also colonized by the British. Guyana was colonized by the British, but not Suriname. That was the Dutch. They must have just like saw what they were doing and copied the homework a bit. And all of South Asia, India, Pakistan, all colonized by the British, except for Myanmar. For some reason, it didn't get there. Thailand infamously was never colonized by anybody, but they still adopted this somehow. Australia and New Zealand were colonized by the British, so I wonder if it's a proximity effect. You also have to think about like what nation was getting and driving around the most cars when that became a popular technology. Obviously, cars were around over 100 years ago, but when did they become like really mainstream, really everywhere? World War II, so then maybe other countries started to adopt it once they saw their neighbors get the hold of that. Perhaps that's what happened with Indonesia and Thailand, I'm not sure, and Malaysia. Well, Malaysia was colonized by the British. I always find it really interesting, the one massive outlier, Canada, did not follow suit. I have to believe that they just saw what we were doing in the US and decided to just go along with that. I mean, we were probably building roads to Canada, so they just kind of had to adopt the whole, just right side driving thing. But then there's also Japan. That is also very confusing to me. South Korea didn't grab that, even though they were taken over by Japan. But then they had the Korean War, the Americans came over. I'm sure that's when we started having them drive on the right. Apparently Japan drives on the left because of the samurai, because they wore their swords on the left side so they could easily unsheath it with their right hand.
Big thanks to my patrons. You can find a link in the description down below to support me.
The beautiful Megan Underwood.
Drum your dad, back with the milk.
Look outside.
A fat
I
normal.
cannot sleep without
Jack
Drew's
Traven's
voice.
annoying
Amateur
friend.
archaeology.
Carmel
Fredrik
Saida.
Tibblin.
InquisitorXarius.
JohnDenver.
KirinoIsBestGirl.
Sebby, if you hear this,
I love
Tambrin,
you.
the
TheGreatRalphy.
Mexican 760.
And ZaneyBoi.